As you've heard already a couple of times, throughout this month we're focusing on resilience in our worship services. And choosing that focus for a whole month is a sort of recognition that all of us face challenges at times, sometimes really big challenges. I would go so far as to say that growth and decline and renewal are natural cycles of life. Sometimes that feels like growing old gracefully. Sometimes that feels like a roller coaster after eating a chili cheese dog. What I want us to keep in mind, though, through the month is that even average, ordinary lives have their roller coaster moments. It's really hard to imagine anyone living a long, full life without some dramatic drops and climbs along the way. And that means we are not alone in this wild journey. Suffering can be an incredibly isolating experience. And it's true that your own individual experience is unique to you. The experience of suffering, though, is just about universal. We are not alone. And there will be climbs and drops until the day that we die. Even in the midst of the dying process, one day to the next is not the same. We are not alone in this journey, and change is the only constant that this brief life provides. This month we focus on getting ourselves through those low points without being destroyed by them. This week, our focus sort of came to me, the focus on resilience, from a book that I'm sure many of you have heard of, Man's Search for Meaning. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl described his time in a concentration camp during World War II. We all know that shattering experience had to be one of the most horrific things to imagine. In his book, Frankl writes about what it was that made a difference between survival and death in those camps. His conclusion was that the people who lived were people who had something to live for. They believed that their lives, even their suffering, had meaning. Here are some of his words. He writes, "Everything can be taken from a person, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. It's this spiritual freedom which cannot be taken away that makes life meaningful and purposeful." Now, Viktor Frankl and his book are incredibly well known, but there are a couple of critiques of his work that I found this week that are important. One critique is that Frankl's view of the significance of personal meaning was developed in an academic setting before the Holocaust happened. It's likely that his experience in the camps reinforced what he already believed, but some of his writing suggests that he came to those ideas from his experience in the camps. That history just doesn't play out. His ideas began in the university, not the camps. The other critique that I think is more important for us is that anchoring meaning solely in your own personal experience can be completely amoral and apolitical. Many voices from the Jewish community pushed back at his theory, saying that type of deeply personal sense of pride is precisely what led Nazi-orchestrated Holocaust in the first place. To me, the lesson in all of this is a personal sense of meaning can be a great driving factor. Frankl would say, and I think I agree, that meaning isn't just helpful, it's absolutely necessary for enduring the challenges of life. A sense of meaning is important, and we would be wise to include in that sense of meaning the dignity and well-being of others, not just ourselves. As Tara alluded to, discerning your sense of meaning is no small feat. But I have a small shortcut that you might want to try. I recently saw a scene in a TV show that offered a great window into exploring a personal sense of meaning. The show is called For All Mankind on HBO. I cannot recommend it highly enough. It is amazing. It's a show about space travel, roughly. It's a lot more complicated than that. But in this particular scene, a woman, a wife of an astronaut, has been offered a life-changing professional opportunity. It's at odds with her husband's career, though, and she's really torn up about what to do. She could comfortably retire, or she could make this big, bold move, this professional step forward. And a friend, one of her very few true friends, offers a wise question. He asks, if your life were a movie, what type of movie would it be? Now, it's clear that the life of her husband would be an adventure movie about an astronaut's career. No one questions that. But her life, as a wife, a mother, a businesswoman, a curious person with a full life, what type of movie would hers be? I love that question. It made me think long and hard. What's the primary plot line that drives the movie of your life? Is it a sense of travel and adventure? I wondered, is it ministry and professional or faith commitments? Now, don't laugh at me, but I think I settled into the idea of it being a romantic comedy. A good romantic comedy, and yes, such a thing does exist. There are some serious bumps along the way and lots of self-discovery, and it's balanced with a healthy dose of laughter and love. At least that's where my mind is right now. Your movie version of your life can change depending on the need. The question remains, if your life were a movie, what type of movie would it be? The question is especially helpful because it adds perspective. A completely happy, easy movie or book where everyone makes the right decision is really boring, not to mention unrealistic. Any story has challenges. Even a sad, tragic plot twist can occur without derailing the whole point of the movie. In fact, drastic challenge often clarifies the theme. I'm reminded of the 2004 movie The Notebook. It's one of the most romantic films I can remember seeing, and it's told through the lens of the way an aging couple navigate dementia together. My point is, there can be plenty of really messy stuff without that being the primary point of the movie. The other way that seeing your life as a movie provides perspective is that it allows us to zoom out a little bit. As a viewer of a movie, part of that sense of meaning and completion is experienced in seeing the film in 90 minutes and completing it. We don't have that luxury when we're looking at our own lives. It's hard sometimes to see past the present moment. But when we take a step back and see the story in its entire perspective, rather than living minute by minute, a broader sense of meaning can emerge. If a movie were made about your life, what kind of movie would it be? Or what kind of movie are you willing to turn it into? For the ministers' reading group this month of February, we're reading Waging a Good War, A Military History of the Civil Rights Movement by Thomas Ricks. And I have to thank Roger Green for recommending it. Just as it sounds, this book looks at the civil rights movement with an eye towards strategy, a lot like A Military History. I've enjoyed reading this much more analytical approach to understanding the movement and its successes and its failures. The history is laid out chronologically in step-by-step description of the various campaigns. In the detail, the reader is reminded of how incredibly dangerous this work was, and how much emotional and spiritual preparation was done for the young people involved. The author writes that one of the key pieces of a military success is knowing who you are, knowing what you want, and knowing what you're capable of. That seems so obvious, but it's something that we gloss right over as we dive into action. First, knowing who you are and what you want. The author points out that Dr. King laid out those couple of pieces in his very first public speech in the movement. Yes, he had been a minister before, but he jumped into this public role at the bus boycotts in Birmingham, at the Holt Street Baptist Church. He said, "First, we're American citizens and expect to be treated as equal members of American society." Very straightforward. And second, he said, black people are simply tired of being abused. Quote, "I want to say that we are not here advocating violence. We have never done that. The only weapon we have in our hand is the weapon of protest." Now today, in retrospect, we know how things unfolded. In that moment, though, it was just beginning. King took the movement a big step forward by offering a clear sense of self-awareness. And it was precisely that depth of self-awareness and the ability to cling to a sense of purpose that drove the success. Nonviolent resistance was at the heart of everything, from how it attracted people and prepared them for the action to how it later deployed them on the streets. The dignity of the marchers was everything. Bayard Rustin, one of the key strategists, said, "If there had been any violence at all, white Southern officials were prepared to deal with that, but they could not deal with people who were being nonviolent." The essential action was to look at your attacker in the eye and register them as a fellow human being, and eventually to be seen as a human being in return. The idea was to take that release of destructive energy and recycle it into positive action. And this was key. This was fascinating. There's nothing passive about what they were doing. They were doing the hard work of actively transforming hatred with their bodies. One of the things that's often missed in books about the movement is how aggressive the strategy was. They had a rule. If there's attack on us, we march, we respond. We always respond forward. The movement was militant in its own way from the start. It sought conflict with the adversary, ideally making him show the system's true face of oppression and racial violence. The details in the book describe the preparation for how protesters were prepared. In training for those lunch counter sit-ins, they practiced what they might encounter. They learned from training to be spit on and still to respond with dignity. They poured coffee on people and kicked chairs out from underneath them in training. A major goal was to identify that fight or flight reaction and to be able to stick with their sense of purpose through that. While the lunch counter sit-ins were humiliating, the freedom rides took the movement to a whole new level. On multiple occasions, mobs of angry white folks relentlessly beat black and white freedom riders, even firebombing the buses that they were in. Writers knew what they were signing up for. James Bevel was in charge of recruiting writers and choosing the right ones. In preparation, he would ask potential freedom writers, "How do you want your body buried?" After that, he said, "All right, now write your eulogy." His test of each written statement was whether or not he felt that he could look parents in the face and tell them why their child had died. These young people, mostly African American, but other races too, dramatically changed the United States by knowing who they were and embodying their core values. They outmaneuvered and outpowered segregation. We tend to focus on how the civil rights movement changed the country, but it also deeply changed those involved. I was really interested to learn about a young woman, Diane Nash, in this book. She was one of the young, very young leaders and strategists who played a critical role in the movement. She said, quote, "One of the things that I've learned over the years is that you really can't change anyone but yourself. And what we did in the South was change ourselves from people who could be segregated into people who could no longer be segregated. The attitude became, well, kill us if that's what you're going to do, but you cannot segregate us any longer. And once you change yourself, the world has to fit up against you in a new way." Writer and activist Adrienne Marie Brown recently wrote, "When we're engaged in acts of love, we humans are at our best and our most resilient. The love in romance makes us want to be better people. The love of children that makes us change our whole lives to meet their needs. The love of family that makes us drop everything to take care of them. The love of community that makes us work tirelessly with broken hearts." Now, in this writing, she was advocating bringing love back into the central focus of justice movements. But I think in our wider conversation, it makes some sense that love could be a reliable source of meaning throughout our lives in this question of resilience, especially in times of challenge. All of those forms of love that she names, romantic, love of children and family, love of community, all those could be called upon to find both material and spiritual relief. And I know love is very ambiguous. Still, it could be an anchoring point for our personal sense of meaning, a place to start. As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, our wider Unitarian Universalist Association is in the process of reviewing Article 2, which you know as the 7 principles and the 6 sources. I'm not going to go into detail about that process. Our intern minister, Casey, will be leading a 3-session workshop about Article 2 revision and how you can have your thoughts involved in that process. For now, today, I wanted to share with you a very basic focus of the latest draft that's been released. And I have an image for the screen, if we can pop that up. This is what has been depicted. The image is a chalice with an overlay of the word love over the flame, with 6 outreached arms that create circle around each core values from a 6-petal flower shape. Clockwise, they are interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and justice. In the center is love. Now, there is a lengthy text that explains this image. We are Unitarian Universalists after all. We like to make sure everyone understands all of our important words. But this image summarizes the feedback that the Article 2 Commission has gotten. From workshops and listening sessions, from organizations and individuals, clergy and laity, they heard over and over that the core of this tradition is love. Now, I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of Article 2 and the rewriting. Google it. Go to Casey's workshop. Today, I just want to point out that if you are looking for a specific meaning or purpose to hang your hat on, it seems that a lot of Unitarian Universalists are pointing to love. Love isn't the only answer to the question of personal meaning. It is a little vague and squishy. You probably want to see how it fits into your particular life. What's a sense of meaning that is strong enough and clear enough to get you through the hard time? What kind of movie is your life? What kind of movie do you want it to be? What gives you the motivation to do the really hard stuff or to get through the hard day? It's not an abstract question of faith, it's a real question. What has proven itself to get you through? Amen.